My first guest is Mike Wood, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley South in the West Midlands. Mike, a very warm welcome to the show. Often the levelling up conversations focus on the north-south divide, but what about the Midlands? Is there a demand there for the once great powerhouse of the United Kingdom to come back in and kick the city out?
Yeah, I mean, this goes well beyond questions of north versus south or in between regions. As you say, the West Midlands, and particularly my part in the Black Country, was really the home, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, has driven so much industrial change in the country. And yet, you go back to, in 1997, Dudley's gross value added, the amount that was being produced per head in Dudley was about 78% of the national average. That's really poor and well behind national average. By 2010, it was down to 64%. Now we have to close that gap if my constituents and if people up and down the country to have the opportunities they deserve, regardless of where they live.
Take you one step back, because I absolutely agree with that analysis, whether you're talking about the Midlands and manufacturing and metal bashing and motor cars and the rest of it, or one step back further, just go slightly up to the northwest and spinning jennies and cotton and stuff like that. It was because the people that were required were there. It was because the raw materials were easily accessible there. And it just evolved. We've now got a Tory government saying, actually, do you know what? We can manufacture that ourselves and determine where those hot spots of economic success are going to be. It doesn't work.
No, I think it's actually quite the opposite. We're trying to actually stop the artificial manufactured. Earlier you used the phrase social engineering. What can be more social engineering than people artificially having to relocate across the country because that's the only way they're going to get the opportunities? As the Prime Minister has said over and over again, talent is spread equally across the country. We know that. We see it in all our communities. But opportunities absolutely aren't. I went to a good state school in Dudley, and virtually everybody I was at school with 30 years ago no longer lives within 10, 15 miles of Dudley. That's because they felt they had to go elsewhere for the opportunities. Part of that is because of the way that investment decisions are taken by the government, as well as private sector opportunity. We have to address that to make sure that the people have the chance to succeed, to prosper in areas like the Black Country, every bit as much as they do in Greater Manchester, in London and the South East, or for that matter, Leeds, Bradford, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. 2
points on that. I mean, government are certainly free, and they've done it to a degree already with the Treasury and one or two other government departments. You can say, right, it's going to leave Whitehall and it's now going to be in Leeds or it's going to be in Doncaster or wherever. Absolutely fine and good. Until the local population catches up in terms of education and qualification, folk are going to have to follow those departments as well to a great extent. And the second point, much more importantly than where a government department is, if you're a Japanese motor manufacturer, you go to the northeast because they're brilliant engineers, or you go to South Wales because they're unemployed brilliant engineers. If you're Microsoft, you go to the Thames Valley because it's full of clever people and it's in the right place and what have you. Are you saying that Michael Gove will tell inward investors where they have to locate if they want to come and trade in the United Kingdom?
I don't think it's a question of having to tell people. It's about making sure that things are possible. Margaret Thatcher moved heaven and earth in the 1980s to get Nissan into the northeast. We've seen the success that's the transformation, as you say. Now it is a region that is known for its automotive industry. And now we're looking at how they can lead the next generation with electric vehicles and the like. It's about making sure that one of the reasons why the Black Country led the first industrial revolution was we were at the heart of the transport network at that time. We were probably amongst the best connected places in the country because of the canal network. It's about making sure that connectivity and infrastructure isn't a barrier to those big investment decisions by those businesses who are coming to create the jobs. And of course, it is about making sure, as you say, that our local schools, our colleges and our industry are working together to make sure that local people have the skills we're going to need to do those jobs, both now and in the future.
My next point, which is that education is, in my humble opinion, the absolute cornerstone of any attempt to levelling up, because 9 times out of 10, and you've just cited examples of that, the men and women, boys and girls who do best anywhere in anything are those that are blessed with the best education. Coming out of COVID, you've got the Kevin Collins plan for catch-up. If you expanded that and said, right, we're going to look at where the poor schools are, and we're going to really target them and build them up. It'll take a bit longer, but that's the way to level up, isn't it, rather than influencing investment decisions?
And I think that's why the announcements made this week on additional premium for levelling up premium in schools to make sure that the best teachers in the country are attracted into many of the areas where they're needed the most. And we've seen the success that London has had over the last decade or two in really turning around so many of its inner city schools to make sure that they've gone from being, some of these boroughs have gone from being some of the worst performing in the country to some of the best. I want to make sure that the Black country, that children at our schools and colleges here are also having those opportunities, and I think that that new levelling up premium is going to help. Is going to help to make the difference. There's no better start you can give to a child than to put them in front of the very best teachers. And as someone who married a primary school teacher, I've got a bit of a vested interest in this, but we need to make sure that there's as many children as possible are being taught in classes with extremely able teachers in whatever subject and right through the age range, right through their education.
Final question, Mike, and it's purely political. How do you distinguish now the Conservative Party, as Boris Johnson and Michael Gove have sought to define it via levelling up? How do you define that as being different from Labour and social justice? And might voters not be tempted to say, well, I'm going to go with Labour because that's what they've always believed in, whereas the Tories are a bit Johnny-come-lately on this one?
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think there's fundamental difference that what levelling up is not about. It's not about redistribution of wealth. It's not about taking away from the successful, the chopping down the tall poppies. It's about making sure that everybody has the best opportunity and then to make the most of that as their skills, their talent and their efforts will take them. I think that is a profoundly conservative principle. It would have been recognised by Margaret Thatcher. It would have been recognised by Benjamin Disraeli. And that's why levelling up, I think, has to be at the heart of any Conservative government's mission.
And not a few Liberals from the turn of the last century as well. Mike Wood, a really informative conversation, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us this Saturday afternoon. I hope you have a great what remains of the weekend. Thank you very much indeed. Mike Wood there, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley South, delving into his political history as well as his economic theory to give his take on levelling up. I'm now joined by Ali Miraj, who's a columnist for The Article, the online news platform. Ali, thanks very much indeed for joining me. You've thought and written widely about this subject. So my first question to you is not a lazy one, it's a genuine one. What do you understand by the term levelling up?
Well, Alastair, I think, look, it's as big a change as deregulation and privatisation was to the Thatcher government in the 1980s. I mean, in Manchester this week at the party's conference where I was in attendance, it not only was mentioned by several cabinet ministers on the platform, but also on the fringe. And I think it really focuses around 3 key elements, and the flesh is going to be put on the bones of these. The first is infrastructure investment in parts, particularly of the north, that have suffered in recent generations by an underinvestment in core infrastructure. So that's fibre, broadband, but it's also the rail networks and other things as well. The second is education, which you just alluded to with your last speaker on education and skills, particularly around the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and trying to create hubs in different parts of the country centered around excellence. So bioscience in certain areas and developments in particularly other industries in other parts of the country. And the third element is devolution, and it's essentially a political one. And you've got mayors such as Andy Street in Birmingham really pushing for a third devolution settlement to really embed devolution and to grant more powers to local mayors. You see the success that Ben Houchen, the Conservative mayor up in Teesside, has had, being returned with 70% of the vote back in May, and then others such as Andy Burnham on the other side of the political aisle who are also pushing for further powers to be devolved. So I think that's also the third element of it.
Add William Hague to that final list there as well, as people who've written eloquently. He read a great piece in the Times about the need for genuine devolution to give people a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose and engagement. But I want to go back to the top of the list because it's the one that worries me most. When did the Conservative Party start believing that it knew better than individual consumers what they should and should not do? And worse still, when did the Conservative Party decide that it knew better than investors where they should place that investment, build that factory, develop that manufacturing site?
Well, Alastair, I disagree with the fundamental premise of the question. Look, the UK has been a very London-centric economy for many, many years. That is not healthy for the country. It's not healthy in terms of economic development for the rest of the country, but it's also unhealthy in terms of the pressures, particularly housing pressures and pressures on infrastructure and public services it places within London. And this is something that Johnson mentioned in his speech, citing the case of Stoke Poges, which has become an extremely popular place to live within the country, but is seeing increasing pressure from housing development. So look, I don't think the Conservative Party is advocating diktats to the private sector on where it should invest. What it's trying to do is to create the conditions for positive investment decisions to be made in other parts of the country. Now, key to that, as I mentioned, is infrastructure. I mean, that is one of the big things. So the HS2 rollout and which parts of it happen first are very, very important. The Northern Powerhouse rail projects, digital gigabit broadband being rolled out also to rural areas, very, very important. And you look at the success of places like Teesside and the fact that Ben Houchen's embedded himself in that community. He's got big plans for the port there. He's also acquired the airport there. These are the kinds of things that industry wants to be secure, that it is going to have the infrastructure, the skills around it, but also the government can introduce tax breaks and incentives for investors to go to these parts of the country, because it is important that we become less London-centric. And you mentioned, Alastair, the fact that the government in this case has also got to lead by example. You see the move of the Treasury, part of the Treasury, to Darlington. You now see the establishment of the new National Infrastructure Bank in Leeds. The government has to lead by example, and I think that's what it's going to try and do here.
Point though, and your Treasury example is a good one to underline the reason I said about social engineering. Is if you move a Treasury Department to the north of England, were there really statisticians, economists, planners sitting there waiting to suddenly apply for the job because they've been out of work or doing something else? Or, truth to tell, hand upon heart, economists from London and the south move up to work in those departments?
I think it's probably the latter at the moment, to be fair.
Yes,
I think you make a very good point.
That's entirely my point, Ali. Whereas if we both agreed on education, if we create more economists and statisticians and the rest of it in the north of England, in those great universities, then it'll work naturally. It's how it should work.
But you need a little bit of a fizz, Alastair, to get the thing off the road. It's a bit like the government making the announcement that it's going to not pull the lever on immigration to deal with the supply side shortages that we're having either, right? So there is going to be structural adjustment that takes place, which is going to take many years to embed. But, the fundamental point there is this pupil premium that they are introducing for a bonus of £3,000 to teachers to go to work in less privileged areas. We need to level up.
First
and the Prime Minister has made this point. Well, look, I floated it myself back in 15 years ago.
I just don't want ideas dressed up as new ideas that are actually 2 years old. Not that it's not a good idea, but then, of course, the brilliant teacher doing maths or science in London, attracted by the money, then goes to the north, then London suffers. There is a potential of it being a vicious circle rather than a perfect circle.
I don't agree. I think that if the investments are made, and it's all about creating the right aspirations and also encouraging people to achieve what they want, achieve the best version of themselves. I think that is the broad vision. Now, when it comes down to actual mechanics of how to do all this, there are going to be things fleshed out. Brendan O'Neill is, Neil O'Brien rather, is writing a paper that is going to come out, we understand, towards the end of October, in line with the Rishi Sunak's spending review. That's going to be part of it. And this is central to the government's ability to retain its red wall seats and even, heaven forbid, actually to increase them. They're looking to actually increase their red wall seats. And you know, Alastair, as well as I do, that the people who voted Conservative at the last election up in those northern seats did so on a very transactional basis. It was not because there was any long-lost, deep-seated love for the Conservative Party, far from it. It was because they felt neglected for decades by a Labour Party that had taken them for granted, and they want to take another look at someone else. If the Conservatives don't deliver, and this is really a 10, 20-year thing, but they need to start moving in the right direction, they will lose that support, and they're very well aware of it. And I think they're fully, judging by the amount of discussions at the Conservative Party conference this week on the fringe, I think that it's central to their mission, and that's what they put Michael Gove in that department to really focus on this as a central plank of the government's moves going forward.